everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Ranch Ride. The Pacific Crest Trail was supposed to be an unforgettable adventure. My boyfriend and I had set out together, hoping to embrace the beauty and challenge of California's vast wilderness. Most hikers knew that hitching rides into trail towns was common, especially when resupplying or dodging bad weather. Locals in towns along the trail were often kind and accustomed to helping hikers. Their generosity became part of the culture, a quiet understanding between travelers and the towns that supported them. That's why, when we found ourselves unexpectedly lost on a less traveled route, we weren't too concerned. We had taken an alternative trail to avoid snow blocking the main path, thinking we'd made a smart decision, but the detour led us off course. After hours of navigating thick brush and slipping through mud, we found ourselves descending into unfamiliar terrain. As we stumbled out of the trees, exhausted and scratched up, we realized we had wandered directly onto private property. This wasn't just a backyard or a cabin nestled in the woods, it was a massive ranch, the type with multiple outbuildings, long gravel paths, and watchful animals. A couple of ranch dogs barked immediately, alerting the owner. We panicked, trying to make our way off the property quickly, hoping not to be seen. But the dogs were quicker. Before we knew it, a man approached us, riding a golf cart, dogs pacing beside him. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and explained that we were hikers who had lost our way. He looked at us closely, then let out a calm sigh, and said it happened all the time. There was no anger in his voice, just a worn patience. He even offered to give us a ride into town, saying he was headed there anyway. Exhausted and relieved, we hesitated for only a moment before accepting his offer. After all, people were kind along this trail, right? As we climbed into the golf cart and rode along the dusty road toward town, he began chatting casually. He told us he used to work for the DEA and had been involved in more shootouts than soldiers in a war, he said with a laugh. I chuckled nervously, not sure what to make of that. It was an odd thing to boast about, but sometimes people had strange senses of humor. I glanced over at my boyfriend, who had gone completely quiet. Normally he'd make small talk, ask questions, or share a laugh, but not this time. He sat rigid, staring forward with a furrowed brow. I could tell something was off. The man, meanwhile, rambled on, talking about law enforcement, old times, and the tough life of dealing with crime. He never once asked us about our hike, or where we were headed. Instead, his stories grew darker with each mile. I tried to tune it out, focusing instead on the passing trees and the approaching town lights in the distance. We finally arrived. He pulled over and let us out, waving us off as if we were longtime friends. As soon as we were out of earshot, my boyfriend grabbed my backpack, pulled out his phone, and told me to check my messages. Confused, I did. What I saw chilled me more than anything that had happened that day. He had found an article about the very man who had just driven us into town. The article described a series of disturbing incidents linked to him. His girlfriend had gone missing shortly after signing her ranch property over to him. She had never been found. The article mentioned suspicious activity on the property and strange circumstances surrounding the transfer of ownership. Then there was another incident, a worker found dead on the property, allegedly the result of an ATV accident. But the autopsy revealed meth in his system, and the death was ruled suspicious, with speculation that it may have been staged. It didn't stop there. The man had also been listed on the sex offender registry. The charges: groping 2 women during a snowmobile tour. My stomach twisted. Everything about that ride replayed in my head, and now all the strange details took on a new, sinister tone. The boastful talk of shootouts, the unsettling silence of my boyfriend, the eerie calm of a man too comfortable with danger. My hands shook slightly as I lowered the phone. We were lucky, so lucky. We had smiled, nodded, and thanked a man who might very well be a murderer, a man whose charm had masked something far more disturbing beneath the surface. I looked at my boyfriend, who was visibly shaken but trying to stay composed. He had done the research while we rode, silently reading in the background while I listened to stories that now felt like red flags. We sat in silence at the edge of the town for a long time, processing what had just happened. I kept thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. We were alone on his property. No one knew exactly where we were. If he had chosen to harm us, there wouldn't have been much we could do. We had trusted the wrong person simply because he seemed kind, and because the culture of the trail had lulled us into a sense of security. I kept thinking about his dogs, how they didn't bark at us when we approached, as if they'd been trained not to react to strangers anymore. I thought about how calm he was, how he never once seemed surprised or concerned about two people walking onto his land, almost like he expected it. Back at our motel, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see that same golf cart slowly rolling down the street, headlights dim and quiet wheels crunching gravel. My boyfriend locked the door and shoved a chair under the knob. We didn't talk much that night. The weight of what we had escaped settled heavily on both of us. When we finally did speak, it was only to say how incredibly lucky we were. We weren't just two hikers who stumbled onto private property. We were two people who unknowingly stepped into the territory of someone with a dark past, someone who had been connected to a disappearance, a death, and had a history of violent offenses. It shook us both in a way that's hard to explain, not just because of the danger, but because of how close we had come to never knowing. The next morning we packed up and took the first bus out of town. The trail felt different now, not just physically but emotionally. The sense of freedom and adventure we had started with had shifted into something more cautious, more aware. We still met kind people, but we asked more questions. We checked names. We looked people up when we could. It didn't feel paranoid, it felt necessary. The trail no longer felt like a storybook path through nature, but a series of unknowns, where danger could be disguised in a smile and a handshake. That experience, brief as it was, changed our entire mindset about the world we were hiking through. And even today, years later, I still think about him. The man with the golf cart, the soft-spoken rancher with blood on his land and secrets behind his stories. I often wonder what would have happened if my boyfriend hadn't looked him up. What if we had stayed to chat longer? What if we had accepted an invitation back to the ranch for dinner, or to spend the night? It's terrifying to think how easily a friendly offer could turn into something else entirely. That ride was only 15 minutes long, but it planted a kind of fear in me that I hadn't known before, the kind that lingers in quiet moments, that whispers when you're alone in the woods, that makes you question the kindness of strangers, no matter how genuine it seems. And even though we were unharmed, the psychological aftermath of that encounter has stayed with us. Every hitch we've taken since has been colored by that one. Every driver is now a potential story waiting to unfold. So if you're ever out hiking, and someone offers you a ride, even if they seem nice, even if you're tired and grateful, do your research. Ask questions. Stay cautious, because the world is full of people with masks on, and some of them wear them very well. It's not about being fearful of everyone, it's about protecting yourself from those who have learned how to blend in. The trail has many stories, and not all of them end with breathtaking views and campfire songs. Some end quietly, behind closed doors, on ranches no one ever visits. And those stories, the ones we narrowly avoid, are the ones we remember the most, the ones we never forget. Story 2. The van that came back. When I think back to my teenage years, the memories of that campground often surface with a strange mix of warmth and unease. My family had a seasonal site at a popular campground, and we spent nearly every weekend there during the summer, along with most long holidays. It was our version of a getaway, a temporary escape from everyday life where we could unwind and mingle with others in a place where time felt slower. We were part of a small, tight-knit group made up of other kids whose families had seasonal spots as well. Some friendships would last only the weekend, while others extended into the next season. That's how it worked. Camp friends came and went, like passing clouds. But there was one summer, one particular weekend toward the end of the season, when I met someone who would haunt the corners of my memory for years to come. His name was Mike, and through him, I met someone else, someone who left a lasting impression I wished I could forget. Mike and I quickly hit it off. We spent the weekend like most kids did, trading Pokemon on our Game Boys, playing pickup basketball, sharing ghost stories around fires. His dad had brought a few family friends with them for the long weekend, and among them was a guy named Andrew. Andrew was older than us by a few years, maybe 17 or 18 at the time. He could drive and had a van that doubled as a tent, which he cleverly rigged to create what we all thought was the coolest campsite setup imaginable. He wasn't particularly charming or talkative, but to younger teens like us, the mere fact that he could drive and had a vehicle made us seem like a legend. We all spent time together that weekend. Nothing felt strange then. Everything felt normal. Just another weekend at camp, surrounded by laughter and the scent of firewood. When Sunday rolled around, Mike and most of his group packed up and left. I figured Andrew would too, but he didn't. He stuck around for a few extra days, and that's when things started to feel different. He kept asking me to hang out, repeating stories about all the cool stuff he had: dirt bikes, a huge TV, a house with no parents home most of the time. He seemed fixated on the idea of us hanging out away from camp. I politely agreed, knowing deep down that I had no intention of seeing him again. For me, camp friends didn't exist outside camp. That was the unspoken rule. When he finally left on Tuesday, he handed me his number. I lied and told him I didn't know my own number, but that I'd call him. The strange part, he never knew my last name. He only knew my first. And given that my mom had remarried, my last name didn't match hers or my stepdad's, so tracking me down wouldn't have been simple. But Andrew found a way. Months later, out of nowhere, I received a message on AOL Instant Messenger. The username was my first name, followed by a number. I replied cautiously. After a few lines, the person revealed they were Andrew. That sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't given him any way to find me. I blocked him immediately. But it didn't end there. Over the course of the next week, I kept receiving messages, different usernames each time, but all variations of my name with different numbers. I must have blocked 8 or 9 accounts in total. It felt relentless, like he was hunting for a crack in my digital defenses. Eventually, I created a brand new profile with a completely different email, making sure not to list any personal information. I thought that would be the end of it. For a while, it was. Then, one evening months later, while I was at home with my family eating dinner, there was a knock at the front door. My mom looked up and casually called my name, saying a friend had stopped by. The word friend didn't register at first, but when I got to the door, I felt the blood drain from my face. It was Andrew, standing on my porch. I hadn't seen him since the campground. I politely told him to leave, trying to stay calm, and after about 15 painfully awkward minutes, he finally walked away. That's when the phone calls began. First, they came from his registered number, which we recognized on caller ID. Then came calls from blocked and restricted numbers. Then from numbers with our local area code ones that made it feel like anyone could be him. When my younger siblings accidentally picked up, thinking it might be a relative or friend, he'd asked to talk to me like we were lifelong best friends. I told him firmly to stop calling. My mother even told him that I'd moved in with my dad, hoping he'd give up if he thought I was no longer there. But the calls didn't stop. He didn't care what we said. He kept trying to reach out, slipping through cracks in the system. Eventually, my mom had had enough. She told him that she would contact the police if he ever called again. That seemed to finally get through. For a while, things went quiet. I started to feel normal again. I let myself believe it was over, that I'd scared him off. But the following summer, everything changed again. I was back at the campground, walking a girl I'd just met that weekend back to her site. It was late, probably around 11, and the woods were quiet. As we walked down a narrow path, a van pulled up slowly beside us. The window rolled down. I heard my name called. It was Andrew. Again, somehow, he had returned to the same campground, and somehow, he found me again. We didn't wait to see what he wanted. My friend and I bolted into the woods, zigzagging through trees and brush until we made it safely back to my family's campsite. I told my mom what happened, and this time she exploded in anger. She stormed to the campground manager's office, banging on the door and demanding they call the police. It was nearly midnight, but officers eventually showed up. They took statements and warned Andrew never to contact me or show up at my home again. The next morning, a neighboring family came by to talk. They had known Andrew's parents and shared disturbing stories. According to them, he had frequent violent episodes that required multiple people to restrain him. He would lose control, they said, thrashing and screaming until he collapsed from exhaustion. That revelation changed everything for me. It wasn't just creepy anymore. It was dangerous. I saw him one more time 3 years later, driving slowly past the apartment complex I had recently moved into. Same van, same blank stare. I don't know if he saw me, but something in me says he did. He didn't stop. He didn't roll down the window or call my name. But his presence alone was enough to send a wave of panic through my chest. I went back inside, locked the doors, and sat quietly by the window for hours. He never returned, but the fear lingered, long after the van disappeared. Now, years later, I still think about him. About how someone can latch onto a person with such intensity. About how easily someone can go from a harmless weekend acquaintance to a stalker who inserts himself into every corner of your life. I've done everything I can to erase the digital trail I left behind. Deleted old accounts, changed usernames, and scrubbed any public information. Still, I wonder if someone really wants to find you, how hard is it? Andrew never knew my last name, and yet, he found me. Again and again. The internet makes it easy. Too easy. And the scariest part is not knowing if someone like that is still looking. These days I stay far away from campground friendships. I don't offer personal information to anyone I meet casually. I don't give out numbers. I trust less, smile less, share less. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being safe. About learning from the things that once left you feeling exposed. Andrew was a lesson, a terrifying, real-world lesson. One I never wanted to learn but had no choice but to survive. And survive I did. But some nights when I hear a van pass slowly down the street, or see a flash of an old username trying to connect, I'm reminded that not all chapters close completely. Some remain ajar, whispering reminders of a past that never asked for permission to follow you home. Story 3. The nightmare that wouldn't end. There are dreams that dissolve like mist the moment we wake, and then there are those rare, terrible ones that cling to your skin long after the morning sun has risen. This one, the nightmare I'm about to share, is unlike anything I'd ever experienced before or since. It happened during a quiet night at home, in a modest apartment I rented with my boyfriend. The setup was unusual, and perhaps that's part of why it made the dream feel so immersive. Our unit was one half of a split house. The living room appeared to have once been a larger space, now divided by a set of French doors to form a bedroom. From our bed, if I faced the French doors, I could clearly see through the living room windows. It was a layout that left me with a panoramic view of the room at night, even in darkness. That night started off like any other peaceful, ordinary, safe. I awoke with a jolt, drenched in cold sweat. My chest heaved with rapid breaths, my heart pounding as if I had just sprinted through a field. A wave of dizziness rolled over me, and my limbs trembled. I thought maybe my blood sugar had dropped, something that had happened before. I checked immediately, minus 155, within the normal range. So what was wrong? Why did my body feel like it had been thrown into fight or flight mode without any visible trigger? The panic grew. I tried to steady my breathing, but the dread clung to me like fog. I stood up, telling myself to splash cold water on my face. The bathroom felt eerily quiet. I dried my face with a washcloth, then hung it up on the towel rack. Something felt off, but I couldn't name it. It was just a sense that the night had grown heavier. On the way back to the bedroom, I suddenly couldn't move. My legs felt like they were filled with cement. It was like being submerged in one of those slow, paralyzing dreams where you try to run, try to scream, and nothing works. I fell, crawling slowly across the floor toward the foot of the bed, desperate to wake my boyfriend. I reached out, straining, terrified only to wake up again in bed. I blinked. Was that a dream? It must have been. But everything felt too vivid. My body still trembled. I convinced myself it was just a bad dream and began to fall back asleep. Then I woke again, or thought I did. I rolled over and glanced toward the living room windows. The blinds were mostly closed, but just enough was open at the bottom that I could see through. A silhouette stood there tall, unmoving, watching. My heart pounded. I turned quickly to wake my boyfriend, but before I could reach him I woke up again. Another layer of the dream. My breath was shaky now. Again I rolled over, and this time the silhouette had a face. I can only describe it as something between Darth Maul from Star Wars and the demon from Insidious, a terrifying fusion of darkness, red, and anger. I screamed inside my own mind, scrambling to rouse my boyfriend. Again I woke up, over and over. Each time the figure drew closer. First he stood at the window, then inside the living room, then just behind the French doors, then, impossibly on our side of them, next, beside the bed, then at the foot of it, just watching me, always watching. He never moved fast. He never spoke, but his presence was suffocating, like drowning in fear. Each time I tried to resist the dream, I would wake only to find myself in yet another layer, the entity always closer than before. I lost track of how many loops I went through. 10, 15. Every time I woke it felt real. I slapped myself. I pulled my hair. I screamed. I scratched at my skin, begged to wake up. Nothing worked. The room always looked the same, familiar but subtly wrong. That same heavy silence, that same awful presence, and always that red and black face watching from closer and closer still. At one point I remember trying to crawl beneath the bed, anything to hide, but I couldn't even move. My body wouldn't obey. My mind was trapped, and there was nowhere to run. It felt less like a dream and more like I had been abducted from my body and thrown into a psychological prison. Eventually I woke up, truly woke up. I knew I was finally out because the tears running down my cheeks were warm and real. The room was as it should be. Nothing out of place. No figures. No dread. I touched the washcloth in the bathroom. It was wet. My blood sugar monitor showed the exact reading I remembered. So I had woken up that first time. I had checked my blood sugar. I had washed my face. But at some point afterward I must have collapsed. Or perhaps my body returned to bed on autopilot, while my mind stayed behind. It's the only explanation that makes any sense, if any of it makes sense at all. That night was like falling into a well of darkness and hitting every nightmare on the way down. Unable to scream, unable to wake, just spiraling deeper and deeper into fear. And yet, I never felt like I was in immediate physical danger. That was the strangest part. The figure never lunged, never attacked, but once it scratched me, sharp and deep. I felt it as pain in my sleep and awoke with faint red lines across my legs. Maybe I'd scratched myself in the chaos. Maybe it was real. Either way, the presence was not passive. It wanted me to feel fear. It fed on it. I'm sure of that now. When I tried to find explanations, medical, psychological, even paranormal, nothing felt satisfying. I'd had nightmares before. I'd even had sleep paralysis. But this was different. This was layered, recursive, a loop I couldn't break free from. My only escape came when the figure stood beside me, his breath almost on my skin, and I simply refused to engage. I shut my eyes and begged for release. I've always believed, to some degree, that there's more to our minds than science can explain. This nightmare reinforced that belief. It wasn't just random misfiring neurons. It wasn't just fear or anxiety. It felt orchestrated, deliberate. And it's not the first strange thing I've encountered. My childhood home was filled with odd experiences, phantom footsteps, beds shaking, shadowy figures glimpsed in doorways. My family even had a history of sleepwalking and lucid dreaming. My mother swears she's astral projected, visiting homes she's never entered and confirming their interiors later. My great-grandmother used to see people walking through the walls before she passed. We dismissed them as hallucinations at the time, but now I wonder, maybe sensitivity to the unknown runs in my blood. Since that night, I've had fewer dreams. They feel muted, cautious, as if my subconscious has become wary of venturing too far. I haven't seen the red-faced figure again, but sometimes, late at night, I sense something, a flicker in the corner of my vision, a sudden drop in temperature, a heaviness behind my eyelids, like a warning, or maybe a promise, that the nightmare isn't over, just waiting, watching, biding its time, and all I can do is hope that when it returns, I'll be ready, or that this time I'll find a way to wake up before it gets any closer. Story 4. The Trucker at the Rest Stop. Long road trips can be equal parts beautiful and draining, especially when you've been driving for days, crossing unfamiliar states and stretching your patience with every mile. My girlfriend and I, both in our early 20s, had been on the road with our dog for quite a while, stopping occasionally for food, gas and dog breaks. It was near the end of our trip, and by then we were in that hazy stage where the fatigue begins to settle deep into your bones. One afternoon, with the sun just beginning its descent and the sky washed in soft orange, we decided to pull off at a rest stop along a quiet stretch of freeway. The dog needed a break, and truthfully, so did we. The lot was nearly empty, except for 3 massive semi-trucks lined up like sentinels along the far end. No other cars, no other travelers, just us in the towering shadows of those long-haul giants. My girlfriend quickly headed toward the restroom building, while I stayed back to leash the dog and let him walk around a bit. The quiet was intense, the kind you only get in places far from towns and traffic. As I stood beside our car, gazing at the dry landscape and letting the dog sniff at the dusty grass, I heard a voice call out behind me. It wasn't loud, just enough to catch my attention. I turned, and there he was, a man seated behind the wheel of one of the parked semis. He had grey hair, wore mirrored sunglasses despite the fading sun, and had a look about him that made me pause. His truck was idling loudly, the diesel engine drowning out most of what he was saying. I couldn't make out the words, so I shouted back, "What?" hoping he'd repeat himself more clearly. He tried again, but the rumble of the truck and the distance made it impossible to hear. I shook my head, gestured that I couldn't understand, and took a few steps closer, not too close, just halfway between our car and his passenger side. "What did you say?" I called out. His reply came slower this time. "I lost my phone," he said. "Can you help me find it?" The way he said it, flat, almost emotionless, made the hairs on my neck stand up. I tried to process the request. A trucker, sitting alone in his cab, asking a complete stranger to come up into his truck to help him search for his phone. It didn't sit right. I glanced toward the restroom building, hoping to see my girlfriend walking back. Not yet. The man repeated, "It's in the truck. Come up here and help me look." His tone had changed ever so slightly, more insistent, almost annoyed. My stomach dropped. I didn't like this. Something about the situation screamed wrong. It was too sudden, too rehearsed, too casual. Who asks someone they don't know, someone clearly just stopping for a quick break, to climb into their truck like that? I took a small step backward and said firmly, "Yeah, I'm good." I tried to sound casual, but there was tension in my voice I couldn't hide. The man leaned out of the window a bit more and said, "You won't help me look for it." That's when my internal alarm fully kicked in. I wasn't about to entertain whatever plan this man might have had. My adrenaline surged. I raised my voice this time. "Get out of here," I snapped, letting the edge in my voice cut through the space between us. I knew I had no real way to defend myself if he got out of that truck. I was just trying to bluff enough confidence to make him back off. I picked up the dog, tossed him gently into the car, and pulled out my phone. Whether or not I called the cops didn't matter, I just wanted him to think I did. I paced in front of our vehicle, phone to my ear, glaring at him as he stayed parked. Then, as if deciding it wasn't worth the risk, he slowly rolled forward, inching his truck down the lane, but he didn't leave right away. He stopped again, just a little farther down, and once more leaned out the window. "You sure you're not going to help?" he called out. My blood went cold. I raised my voice even more, my tone no longer polite or hesitant. "No, I'm calling the cops right now," I shouted, loud enough for the whole empty rest stop to hear. That did it. He stepped on the gas and pulled away, merging back onto the freeway and disappearing down the road. I stood frozen in place, watching the truck shrink in the distance until it was just a speck of movement on the horizon. My heart was racing. My hands shook. I had no idea what that encounter could have become if I'd gotten into that truck. A part of me wanted to believe it was just a harmless misunderstanding. Maybe he really had lost his phone. Maybe he just wanted help. But my gut told me otherwise. And sometimes, your gut knows things your brain isn't ready to process. When my girlfriend returned, she immediately saw the expression on my face. She asked what was wrong, and I told her everything. Her reaction matched mine, disbelief followed quickly by dread. We both sat in the car for a long while, doors locked, replaying the event in our minds, trying to figure out what exactly had just happened and what could have happened. After that, the rest of our trip felt different. That brief moment, barely 2 minutes long, had changed the mood entirely. Every rest stop afterward was a cautious scan of the area. Every stranger who waved or approached was met with guarded suspicion. We realized how quickly something could turn from mundane to terrifying. That rest stop, quiet and empty, had turned into a stage for something we'll never fully understand. And that man, whoever he really was, might have moved on to another highway, another target, or maybe I overreacted. Maybe nothing would have happened. But I'd rather deal with the guilt of walking away than the consequences of walking into danger. We still talk about that day sometimes, especially when we're driving long distances. My girlfriend always says she's proud of me for listening to my instincts. I tell her it wasn't bravery, it was survival. Something ancient inside me screamed that I was about to make a mistake, and for once I listened. It's strange how moments like that can alter you. They don't leave scars on your body, but they shape the way you see the world. They remind you that even in quiet places, maybe especially in quiet places, you have to stay alert. Not every smile is friendly. Not every question is harmless. And not every rest stop is as restful as the name implies. So to anyone out there who's driving late, stopping briefly, or stretching their legs, trust your gut. It doesn't matter how awkward it feels to say no, or how rude you might seem when you walk away. You owe nothing to a stranger who makes you uncomfortable. Your safety matters more than politeness, more than curiosity, more than the benefit of the doubt. That day at the rest stop could have ended very differently. I'll never know what his true intentions were, but I do know this: walking away might have saved my life. Story 5. The mysterious eggs. Some houses have quirks, things that go bump in the night, strange electrical issues, doors that seem to drift open even when you're sure you closed them tight. But nothing quite prepared my husband and me for what we experienced during that one peculiar week, a series of events that, to this day, we refer to only half-jokingly as the egg incident. We lived alone, just the two of us and our cat Sammy. It was a peaceful arrangement. We both worked full-time and commuted together. No children, no roommates, no landlords with access to the place. Our home was quiet and consistent, a comforting sort of normal. We had our routines, and life felt predictable, until the day we came home from work and found an egg sitting on the kitchen floor. At first we laughed. It was so out of place, so absurd, that we both thought maybe it had rolled off a shelf or dropped from a forgotten grocery bag. But we didn't even buy eggs. We used liquid egg whites from a carton because we rarely cooked breakfast, and traditional eggs always expired before we could finish them. Still, this one egg sat perfectly centered on the kitchen floor, uncracked, unmarred, like it had been placed there with care. It was so pristine it could have been from a commercial. We searched the fridge, no eggs. Checked the trash, nothing. The confusion lingered, but eventually we shrugged it off, laughed again, and tossed it in the bin. Just one of those weird, unexplainable moments life sometimes throws at you. The next day we came home and stopped cold in the doorway. There, in the exact same spot on the kitchen floor, was another egg, identical to the first. Clean, whole, and completely foreign to our pantry or refrigerator. That time we didn't laugh. We stared at it in silence for a long while, that uneasy feeling creeping up our spines. We checked the house from top to bottom. Windows still locked. No sign of forced entry. Our cat Sammy, ever unbothered by the supernatural, lounged in the living room without a care in the world. But something was wrong. Very wrong. We didn't crack the second egg either. We just threw it away again, but with more hesitation. Neither of us wanted to talk about it too much. It felt like giving it more attention would only feed the unease. The following morning, I woke early to check the kitchen before we left for work. No egg. No mess. Just a clean, quiet kitchen. That evening, when we came home, I was nearly afraid to look. I pushed open the door slowly, heart pounding, and there was nothing. No egg. No surprises. I let out a long breath. Maybe it had just been some bizarre, isolated event. Maybe despite everything we could still chalk it up to coincidence. But then the next night, it happened again. Egg number 3. Same spot. Same condition. But this time I noticed something even stranger. A faint ring of dust around the egg. as if something had briefly hovered there and disturbed the settled particles. It didn't look like it had rolled or dropped. It looked placed. By this point, we were beyond confused. I even set up a small camera in the corner of the kitchen, hidden behind a potted plant, hoping to catch whatever or whoever was responsible. But the next day, when we checked the footage, the camera had turned off during the exact time frame we were gone. Just a few hours of blank static in an otherwise perfect recording. The egg was there again. Perfect. Centered. Quiet. I remember sitting on the floor that evening, just staring at it. Sammy sauntered in, looked at the egg, sniffed it, and then walked away disinterested. Not exactly the behavior of a cat sensing danger, but I couldn't help but feel like something was observing us, playing with us, waiting. We started talking about it more seriously. Could someone be entering the house while we were gone? A prankster? A neighbor with a key? But there were no signs of intrusion. And why eggs? Of all things, why eggs? Why perfectly whole, pristine eggs? No notes, no threats, just quiet appearances, like soft warnings. I began researching folklore, just out of curiosity. In some traditions, eggs represent life. In others, they symbolize fertility, rebirth, or transformation. But in certain cultures, eggs appearing mysteriously in the home can be omens, markers of a spirit's presence, or a household being watched by something not entirely of this world. Still, none of it made sense. Why us? Why now? The last egg appeared on a Thursday. That one was different. It wasn't in the center of the kitchen like the others. It was placed gently on top of our dining table. A new location. A deliberate change. Almost like escalation. My husband and I stood there for what felt like an hour, neither of us moving, speaking, or even blinking. That egg broke something inside us. It was too much. We threw it away and didn't sleep that night. The next morning, before leaving for work, we checked every square inch of the house. We both locked every window and door together. We both left together, drove to work together, and returned home together. And that day there was nothing. No egg. No camera malfunction. No change. Just the eerie feeling that whatever had been happening had finally stopped, but not necessarily gone. Years have passed, and it's never happened again. Sometimes we joke about it, tell it as a strange anecdote to friends over drinks. Remember the egg thing? We'll say, laughing nervously. But deep down, we both know it wasn't funny. It was unsettling. It was unexplained. It was the first and only time something completely illogical entered our world and left no trace except for a story we still can't explain. We never found answers, and maybe we never will. But every now and then, when I'm alone in the kitchen, I glance at the floor and imagine one waiting there again, still, silent, staring back at me with the weight of everything I'll never understand. I've heard stories of hauntings that leave scratches, slamming doors, or disembodied whispers. Ours left eggs. Clean, quiet eggs. And somehow that's what makes it worse. There was no noise, no spectacle. Just the quiet suggestion that we weren't as alone as we believed. Sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones that don't scream, they simply appear. Again and again. Until you start to question reality itself. I've made peace with it now. But I still keep the fridge stocked with our usual liquid egg whites. Just in case. If another egg ever shows up, I'll know it wasn't us. It was never us. It never needed to be. Story 6. The Creaking Woods. There's something about the wilderness that can make you feel both alive and insignificant. The deep hush of towering trees, the way wind rustles dry leaves like whispers, and the way the sky disappears behind a canopy of branches, it all makes you feel like a visitor in someone else's world. I was tree planting deep in the mountains near Smithers, British Columbia. It was remote, an hour and a half from town via winding, dusty logging roads that twisted through forest and forgotten landscapes. Most nights in camp were calm and exhausting. You'd finish a brutal day of planting, crawl into your tent, and drift off into a deep, dreamless sleep. But not that night. That night was different. That night the air felt too still, like the forest itself was holding its breath. It was almost midnight. I was lying in my tent, trying to coax myself into sleep. The area I'd pitched my tent in was surrounded by tall, Dead trees. They were known for creaking loudly when the wind picked up, sometimes sounding like mournful groans. But that night the wind was absent. No creaks, no rustling branches, just a vast unnatural silence. That's when I first heard its sticks cracking, twigs snapping, soft pads of weight pressing against the forest floor. The sounds weren't random. They came in a rhythm, slow, steady, deliberate. Something or someone was walking, and it was getting closer. Every few minutes, another snap, another footfall, louder now, closer. At first I thought it might be a bear. It wouldn't be unheard of in these parts, but even that explanation didn't sit right with me. This wasn't the erratic shuffling of a wild animal. This was too methodical. I sat up slowly, heart thudding. My tent suddenly felt like paper. Flimsy, useless, vulnerable. Whatever was out there was just on the other side of the canvas. I grabbed my flashlight but didn't dare turn it on. I didn't want to draw attention. Instead, I listened. Closer and closer. The sound stopped no more than 15 feet from where I sat frozen. I held my breath, waiting to hear movement. A growl. A snort. Anything. But there was nothing. Just an overwhelming stillness. I called out loudly, trying to sound casual. "Hey," I said, voice a bit shakier than I'd hoped. But I got no answer. Nothing moved. No scurrying. No running. Not even a crunch of leaves. Just silence. And the longer it lingered, the heavier it felt. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears like pressure underwater. I stayed in my tent, unmoving, for 20 minutes. And then it came a sound so strange, so unnatural, that even now I struggle to describe it. It was like the creaking of those dead trees, but extended, drawn out into a long, unwavering note. It started low and rose gradually, holding steady like a mechanical hum blended with the voice of the forest. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a tree. I know what those sound like. This wasn't nature. This was mimicry. I knew in my gut that this was something pretending to be a tree, or at least using that familiar sound to keep me calm. But instead, it had the opposite effect. My blood ran cold. Every cell in my body screamed that something was wrong, terribly wrong. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even cry out. All I could do was listen to that long, eerie groan pierce the silence like a warning. After what felt like an eternity, the noise stopped. I waited in that dead silence for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I didn't shift. I barely breathed. I was waiting for something else, another sound. A sign that it had moved on. Or worse, that it was still there. Morning light crept into my tent like a gentle rescue. When I finally unzipped the flap and stepped out, everything looked normal. No footprints. No broken branches. No signs that anything had ever been there. But I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had felt. I tried to shrug it off. Tell myself I was exhausted. That maybe it was the wind and I just didn't notice. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Days passed, and the memory faded, but it never disappeared. It nestled itself quietly in the back of my mind, waiting. And then, years later, I came across a post online about creatures known as skinwalkers, shapeshifters, beings that mimic voices, animals, sounds, anything to lure you closer. That's when my stomach turned over. Because everything I read matched the feeling I had that night. The mimicry. The eerie silence. The impossibly strange sound designed to be familiar, yet wrong. I don't claim to know what I heard. I'm not saying it was a skinwalker. But I do know this: it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't the forest. It was something that wanted to be mistaken for both. Since then, I've avoided camping deep in isolated woods. I'll still go on hikes, still appreciate nature, but never again will I sleep alone in a tent with nothing but canvas between me and the unknown. That night changed the way I view the wild. It's not just a place of peace and beauty. It's also ancient, mysterious, and sometimes it watches back. I've spoken to others in forestry and replanting. Some have heard whispers where there were no voices. Some have seen lights where no road exists. And some, like me, have heard mimicry so precise it left them speechless. We don't talk about it much, but we all know what's out there. Or more accurately, we know that we don't know what's out there, and that's what makes it so terrifying. Now and then, especially during stormy nights when the wind picks up just enough to rattle branches and hum through the walls, I think back to that sound of creak that never bent, never swayed, never changed. The steady, droning hum that wasn't quite a tree, wasn't quite a voice. It lives in the corner of my memories now, not loud but constant. A reminder that some places are not meant to be understood, only respected, only feared. Whatever stood outside my tent that night didn't need to speak. Its silence said enough. I was not alone, and I never truly would be again. Story 7. The Crawling Man in the Dark. There are moments in life that seem perfectly ordinary until they shift, and you realize something is horribly, terribly wrong. My partner and I had planned a relaxing evening watching the meteor shower, something we both had been looking forward to for weeks. It was a warm August night, and we packed a blanket, some takeout, and drove out to a massive park nestled just on the edge of our city. It was the kind of park that felt like a small wilderness, thick trees, long trails and secluded clearings. We knew just the spot to lay our blanket, a wooded area where city lights couldn't reach, and the sky would open up above us like a canvas painted with stars. We used our phone flashlights to guide us, the world around us slipping into silence as we entered the shadowed path and picked our way through the forest floor. We found our clearing, a soft patch of grass surrounded by trees, with just enough of the night sky peeking through to give us a view. We set our things down, turned off the flashlight, and lay back. Music played faintly from my phone, soft, melodic, comforting. My partner rested beside me, gazing up in quiet wonder, while I shifted onto my side to relax. I remember adjusting my sundress, untying the ribbon around my waist to breathe easier. For a while, we said nothing. We just lay there, waiting for a shooting star to streak across the heavens, but none came. After a few minutes, I stopped looking at the sky and let my eyes wander around the dark edges of the clearing. That's when I saw it movement. Something low to the ground, just on the edge of where the trees began. At first I thought it was a dog. I blinked, trying to adjust to the lack of light. The form was moving steadily toward us, its movements animalistic but wrong. There was no bounce, no wag, no energy, just deliberate, crawling motion like it was dragging itself with intent. I felt my stomach knot as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "There's something coming," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I think it's a dog." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. My partner turned to look and froze. That's when we both saw it clearly. It wasn't a dog. It was a man, crawling on all fours, but not like someone imitating an animal. His body was flat, chest grazing the earth, limbs splayed at angles that looked painful, and worst of all, he was crawling toward us. Panic gripped me, but my body refused to move. My partner was quicker. He bolted upright, whispering sharply, get up now." I tried to tie my dress again, but my fingers trembled too badly. "Forget it," he said, grabbing my hand. "We need to go." We didn't gather our things. We left everything behind. With only our phone's dim light and instinct guiding us, we ran tripping over roots, pushing past low-hanging branches. My breath came in sharp bursts, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, afraid to see him behind us. But the path twisted, and I saw nothing. No sound of pursuit, just the quiet panic between our hearts. When we finally burst out of the woods and into the lighted part of the park, we didn't stop running until we reached the car. Only then did we look back. The trees were still. No sound, no figure. It was like the forest had swallowed him. We drove home in silence, our hands still trembling, the smell of pine and damp earth clinging to our clothes. I remember sitting in the passenger seat staring out the window, still trying to make sense of it. Who was he? Why was he crawling like that? What would have happened if we hadn't noticed him in time? We told ourselves it could have been a homeless man, maybe someone high or unwell, but the way he moved, it wasn't natural. It wasn't human. Or maybe it was, but something about him had forgotten how to be. That's what chilled me the most. He didn't crawl like someone injured. He crawled like he belonged to the forest. For days after, I couldn't get the image out of my mind. The shape of him, his limbs dragging, the way his body seemed to stretch into the ground like roots. My partner and I barely spoke about it at first. Every time we tried, the words got caught in our throats. Eventually we forced ourselves to recount it together, just to be sure we hadn't imagined it. But we hadn't. We both remembered the same thing. The movement. The silence. The slow, deliberate crawl. It became an unspoken rule between us not to go back there. Not at night. Not alone. And definitely not deep into the woods. Sometimes, curiosity would tempt us. But then one of us would say, "Do you remember that night?" And the memory would come flooding back, stopping us cold. We looked up stories. We searched online, but nothing matched exactly. People talked about crawlers, about cryptids, about forest spirits, but most were vague, shadowy tales. Ours was real. We saw him. We ran from him, and though he never reached us, the fact that he was there out in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, haunts us still. Some nights, I wake up and swear I hear rustling outside the window. I remind myself it's the wind, just the wind. But every once in a while, I'll have a dream where I'm back in that clearing, the stars above me, the music faint, and I see him crawling, closer, closer, until I wake heart racing. Eventually, we return to that park, but never at night, never past dusk. We walked the trails during the safety of day, trying to find the exact spot, but it all looked different in the light. Softer, less threatening, like nothing bad could ever happen there. Still, we couldn't find that clearing again. Maybe it's grown over, or maybe it was never really part of the trail. Maybe we wandered somewhere we weren't meant to go, somewhere older, wilder, a place where things move differently, and where the rules of the world shift just slightly out of focus, a place you find once and never again. To this day we wonder, did we see something human, something sick or lost, or something else entirely, something not bound by the shape of man, but wearing it? I don't know what he was, or where he came from, or why he chose that moment to crawl out of the woods, but I do know this: if we hadn't left when we did, if we'd waited just a little longer, we might not have made it out. And if you ever find yourself alone in a dark clearing, deep in the woods, and you see something crawling toward you in the silence, don't wait to find out what it is. Run. Run, and don't look back. Story 8. The Tall Thing by the Road. There are places on this earth that carry a strange stillness, a kind of quiet that presses against your chest and makes you pause for reasons you can't explain. One of those places for me was an area near Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. I've lived there most of my life. The older parts of the town hold a peculiar atmosphere, like time has pooled there, unmoving, untouched. The roads wind through fields and wooded patches that seem to resist change. Even as a child, I felt something unusual about the area near Moores Mountain Road and Observatory Drive. The trees always seemed a little too dense, the shadows too long, even in the daytime. There was an old church that claimed to own a haunted path called Spook Hollow, and even though people joked about it, the name stuck for good reason. It was October of 2012, a cool fall night like many others. Nothing out of the ordinary happened while I was there. Just laughter and the clinking of glasses, the kind of comfort that comes from routine. Around midnight, I decided to head back home. The roads were mostly empty, and the world around me was painted in a faint silver glow from the moon. I took Route 382 heading east toward Lewisburg, a path I'd driven hundreds of times without incident. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but just as I approached the stretch near the old Brenneman property, just before the turn onto Brenneman Drive, I saw something. At first it looked like a man walking along the shoulder of the road. That in itself wasn't terribly odd. It wasn't freezing out, and occasionally you'd see someone out walking, even at night. But as I got closer, I began to realize something was off. He was tall, exceptionally tall, at least 6.5 feet, maybe more, and thin, unnaturally thin. He wore all black, a tight black coat, dark pants, and boots that didn't seem to quite match the season. His skin was dark too, blending almost seamlessly with his clothes, and his hair was cropped short. He walked stiffly, his movements jerky, as if he was unfamiliar with how his body worked. I slowed the car slightly, unsure if he needed help. But before I could decide, something happened that I'll never forget. Without warning, the man dropped down onto all fours and darted across the road directly in front of my car. I slammed the brakes and skidded slightly. My headlights caught him in full for a brief second, and my breath caught in my throat. His limbs bent the wrong way. His face, God, that face, it wasn't right. It was black, like the rest of him, but there was something canine in the structure, a snout where there shouldn't be one. Eyes too far apart. He looked like a creature wearing a human suit that didn't fit. He scurried into the trees on the other side of the road, disappearing in seconds. I sat there frozen, engine idling, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, barely noticing the familiar turns and signs. The next day, the image of what I'd seen wouldn't leave my mind. I kept trying to reason it away. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was tired, had too much to drink, imagined more than was really there. But the truth is, I hadn't been drunk. I was fully alert when I saw that thing, and I knew what I saw. I told a few close friends about it, hesitantly, not wanting to be labeled crazy. To my surprise, a few of them looked back at me with wide eyes. One even said, "You're not the first to see something weird out there." Apparently the area around Moores Mountain had long been rumored to host strange happenings, creatures, lights, things that didn't belong. Still, I didn't tell anyone beyond that small circle. I was self-employed and couldn't afford to be seen as unstable or delusional, so I buried the story for years. But it lingered in me like a seed planted too deep to remove. Sometimes I'd dream about that thing, the way it moved, how its limbs bent unnaturally. The image would flash in my mind while driving down quiet roads, or while sitting in the stillness of early morning, when shadows play tricks on tired eyes. I started researching late one night, curious if anyone had seen something similar elsewhere. I came across a report from Texas of a creature called a stilt walker, and the image sent shivers down my spine. It wasn't an exact match, but it was close enough to stir something in my chest. There's a part of me that wishes I'd never seen it, that I could have gone on believing that the world is only what we see, that monsters are just fiction, that everything lurking in the dark can be explained away. But that night changed things. It tore a hole in my understanding of reality. I don't walk alone at night anymore, especially not near the woods. I don't stop for people on the side of the road, no matter how much they seem to need help. I keep my doors locked and my eyes moving. And every time I drive past that spot near Brenneman Drive, I feel it, that same pressure in the air, that same cold prickle on the back of my neck. Like the trees remember what I saw, even if no one else does. I've never seen the creature again, and a part of me hopes I never do. But I also wonder if it ever saw me, if it remembers my headlights blinding it for that brief moment, if it waits in the shadows, watching cars pass by, wondering which ones will stop. People can tell me it was exhaustion or paranoia, or the dark playing tricks. They can laugh or shrug it off. That's fine. I don't need anyone to believe me. I know what I saw. And I know that once you've glimpsed something impossible, the world never looks quite the same again. We like to think we know what walks our roads, what calls the forests home. But the truth is, there are still things out there, and sometimes, late at night, they crawl out of the dark just to remind us they're real. And so I live with the memory, like a quiet passenger beside me, whispering warnings I now take seriously. I don't chase the unexplained. I don't tempt the unknown. Some things, whatever they are, don't want to be seen, and others, they want you to see them and never forget. Story 9. The Eyes Behind the Glass. There's a kind of quiet that only gas stations can have in the dead of night. It's not silence exactly, but a kind of stillness, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, the hum of freezers in the background, and the occasional shuffle of a tired footstep echoing off linoleum. I worked at one of those stations. It wasn't a chain or a big brand, just a lonely little stopper clinging to the edge of a forgotten highway, halfway between two small towns. Most nights were uneventful, with the odd traveller pulling in for gas or a bathroom break, but once in a while, the night opened its mouth and whispered something you weren't meant to hear. This is a story from one of those nights one I've never told until now. It was a little past 2 a.m, and the sky outside was cloaked in heavy clouds. No stars in sight. A soft drizzle tapped against the windows, just enough to make the parking lot glisten. I stood behind the counter, flipping lazily through an old magazine someone had left behind. sipping lukewarm coffee that had been brewed hours earlier. The camera showed no activity. The gas pumps were empty. Everything was still, until the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, expecting to see a trucker or a local on a coffee run, but there was no one there, just the door slowly swinging shut as if someone had walked in, but no footsteps followed. For a second, I figured it might have been the wind. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward the door, looking out into the parking lot. Nothing. Just the rain. No cars. No figures. No movement. I had to head back when I heard it a quiet creak, like the sound of weight shifting on one of the back aisle floorboards. I froze. I wasn't alone. I called out, trying to sound casual. "We're closing in 15 minutes, I said, but no reply came. I grabbed the flashlight we kept near the register and walked slowly toward the back of the store, shining the beam between shelves of dusty snacks and empty coolers. I reached the back aisle and stopped. A cold draft tickled the back of my neck, and my light flickered once, then steadied. Still nothing. I checked every row. No one hiding, no movement, nothing out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, something watching. I returned to the front, chalking it up to a trick of the mind or perhaps a stray draft that opened the door. I sat down behind the counter, trying to settle back into that quiet rhythm. That's when I saw it, on the security screen. Camera 4 facing the pumps showed a man standing just outside the store. He hadn't been there when I checked a moment ago. He stood perfectly still, just at the edge of the overhang, where the rain met the concrete. His clothes were old tattered coat, wide-brimmed hat, boots soaked and worn. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even blink. I leaned forward, squinting. His face was in shadow, but I could just barely make out the gleam of his eyes. They weren't normal. They didn't reflect the way human eyes do in low light. They glowed faintly, like dying embers. My heart pounded. I glanced out the front window, but he was gone. Just like that. Nothing there but falling rain and darkness. I checked the tape, rewound a few minutes. There was nothing. No man. No movement. The feed didn't even glitch. It was as if he had never existed. I was officially spooked now. I locked the door, even though we technically stayed open all night. Then I turned off the lights inside, leaving only the glow from the cooler and the register screen. I sat in the dark, not touching my coffee, just waiting for morning to come. Once, twice, then shut off completely. I stared into the darkness of that hallway, not daring to move. I felt it again, that sensation of being watched. Not by something near, but something just beyond the veil of sight. The sun began to rise just after 5 a.m. The clouds finally began to part, and the grey dawn bled through the windows like a relief I hadn't realized I needed. I unlocked the door just as my replacement arrived. He took one look at my face and asked if I'd seen a ghost. I didn't answer. I just handed him the keys and left. I didn't sleep that day. I lay in bed with the curtains shut, eyes fixed on the ceiling, playing the footage over in my mind. No one ever believed me when I told the story later. They said it must have been a trick of the camera, or maybe a dream brought on by exhaustion, but I know what I saw. I quit the job a few weeks later. Too many nights passed with strange shadows, lights flickering for no reason, and that feeling, that unmistakable feeling that something was standing just outside the window, waiting for me to look. I don't drive past that station anymore. It still stands, last I heard. New staff, same building. But I wonder sometimes if anyone else has seen him. The man in the coat, the one with glowing eyes and no reflection on the tapes. And if they have, do they know what he's waiting for? Story 10. The man at the motel window. There's something inherently unsettling about cheap motels on the edge of town, those isolated ones, where the neon signs flicker half dead and the front desk clerk barely looks you in the eye. I was on a long road trip across the country, the kind you take when you don't know where else to go. I was tired, not just from driving but from everything: life, work, noise. I pulled off the interstate just before midnight and followed a lonely road that led to a weather-beaten motel called the Amber Rest. It had maybe 15 rooms, one soda machine, and an empty lot stretching into darkness behind it. The parking lot light buzzed weakly overhead, casting more shadows than safety. I paid in cash and was handed a brass key attached to a plastic diamond tag with the number 7 etched on it. My room was second from the end, and I parked right in front of it, dead tired. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Musty carpet, peeling wallpaper, a bed that dipped in the center like it had a memory of every person who'd ever laid there. I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. I set my bag down, used the bathroom, and drew the thick curtains closed over the single front window. The night outside was pitch black. No cars passed. No crickets chirped. Just a blanket of stillness so deep it made me feel like the last person on earth. I didn't bother turning on the TV. I just lay on the bed, eyes closed, letting exhaustion take me. And that's when I heard it a knock. It was soft. Barely a tap. 3 slow knocks against the window pane. My eyes snapped open, and I froze. I told myself it must be in the wind, or maybe a branch. But there were no trees near the window, just pavement and the empty lot beyond. I waited, holding my breath. Another knock. This one louder, more deliberate. I sat up slowly, heart pounding in my chest, and stared at the curtain. I couldn't see anything, of course, but I felt it something. Someone was on the other side of that glass. I didn't move, didn't speak. Then a voice, low, hoarse. "Mal, let me in." It was whispered, but somehow it carried through the glass like it was inside the room with me. I stood up, shaking, and grabbed the lamp from the nightstand. It was heavy and solid, the closest thing I had to a weapon. I moved slowly toward the window and peeled back a corner of the curtain just enough to peek through. At first I saw nothing, just my own reflection, the car parked outside, the orange flicker of the parking lot light. But then I saw him, a man, standing completely still just inches from the glass. His skin was pale, almost bluish, his eyes wide and unblinking. He wore a thin shirt, despite the cold, and had no shoes. He didn't look homeless. He didn't look injured. He looked wrong. There was something off in his proportions. His limbs too long, his face stretched unnaturally. He didn't shiver, didn't breathe, just stared at the glass like he could see through me. I dropped the curtain and backed away, heart thundering. The voice came again. "Let me in." I didn't answer. I didn't move. Then I heard the doorknob jiggle. Just a little, testing, trying. I rushed to the door and double-checked the lock, then shoved the desk chair under the knob for good measure. I turned off all the lights and sat in the far corner of the room, watching the window from the shadows. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I don't know. The knocks never came again. Eventually, dawn crept over the sky and the darkness thinned. When I finally dared to look out again, the lot was empty. No sign of him. No footprints. Just a quiet morning and a few birds chirping like nothing had happened. I packed my things in record time, tossed the key on the desk, and drove away without looking back. That day, I told myself it was a dream. Hallucination. Sleep paralysis. Maybe. But that night, as I checked into a different hotel hours away, I pulled the curtain in my room closed and something caught my eye. On the outside of the glass, near the bottom corner, smeared faintly into the condensation, was a handprint. Thin, long, as if someone had been there, watching. I didn't sleep much after that. Every motel room blurred together, but each one I entered, I checked the window first. Every night, I listened for that knock. Sometimes I thought I heard it, even if nothing was there. I stopped telling people about it after one friend laughed and said, "You sure you weren't just lonely?" But loneliness doesn't knock on glass. It doesn't whisper through sealed windows. It doesn't leave handprints where no one should be. I haven't seen him again, but I feel like I might. Like one night, in a room just like that one, I'll hear the knock again. And this time the lock might not hold. So if you ever find yourself in a roadside motel, with tired eyes and a heart full of distraction, remember to check your window before you close your eyes. And if you hear a knock, if you hear a voice whispering to let it and don't answer, don't look. Just wait for the sun, because some things wait in the dark for a window to open, and once you see them, they don't forget your face.